Okay, welcome to Elon, the trial attendee, I guess.
Trial.
I mean, I hope not.
On trial. Pretty trial.
Good trial.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're in the middle of Masechet Arachin. In particular, there's two dapim, Ted Vav and Ted Zayin, that deal a lot with the issue of Lashon Hara, and there's a lot of Agarata that we've been talking about the last few weeks. And this week, what we'll be talking about is actually probably the primary source in the Gemara, certainly one of them, around the question of rebuke. Rebuke is obviously connected to Lashon Hara, and the Torah says but the question is, what are the bounds of that, right? Are you supposed to rebuke at all costs? Are you only supposed to rebuke to a certain extent, right? What if a person is not going to listen to you no matter what? Is there even a point in rebuking them? What if a person will get very upset and it could put you in danger? Is that something that you should still have to do? So the bounds of Tוכחה are, even in the halachic context, are dealt with a lot. And we will be discussing kind of the ramifications specifically of the question of hiכן תוכחה. How far do you have to rebuke someone in a context where there is a chance that they'll listen to you until it's already too much and you don't have to do it anymore? And the source for the machloket is really a story in Nevi'im, in Shmuel Aleph. So first, before we go into the Gemara and Arachin, we'll learn the story in the Navi, just to remind ourselves, and then we'll see the various mefarshim, Rishon and Achronim, how they deal with various issues that come up in the sugya. So let's start with the psukim, actually, which we don't usually do, but it's important for this particular sugya. So the story is Shmuel Aleph, Perek Chaf. This is right when David is in his ascendancy, and Shmuel is starting to kind of become senile and have the ruach ra'ah, and he tries to kill David, right, more than once. And Yonatan, Shaul's son, is a friend of David's and tries to protect him. So one of the stories that's told is the following: Vaysater David basadeh. So David hid in the field. Vayia chodesh, vayeshav melech el alechem lechol. So it was Rosh Chodesh, and the king, he gathered his court, and they were having a Rosh Chodesh meal, I suppose. Vayeshav melech ha-moshavo kefam befam el moshav akir. Vayakom Yonatan, vayeshav Avner mitzad Shaul, vayipaked mekom David. Okay, so he had his cabinet. So his son Yonatan was there. Avner, who was his commander in chief, was there, and David, who usually sat there, his place was missing because David was hiding in the field. ולא דיבר שאול מאומה ביום ההוא, מאומה, כי אמר מקרהו בלתי טהור הוא כי לא טהור. Okay, so Shaul thought, okay, maybe it's just a coincidence. He had a reason that he became tameh, so that's why he didn't come. ויהי ממחרת החודש השני, so then it was the second day, ויפקד מקום דוד, and David was missing again. ויאמר שאול ליונתן בנו מדוע לא בא בן ישי גם תמו גם היום אל הלחם. Okay, so already on day 2, it's already suspicious. So Shaul asks his son, where's David? ויען יונתן את שאול, נשאל דוד מעמדי עד בית לחם. So Yonatan lied to his father. He said to Shaul, David asked me for permission to go to Beit Lechem. ויאמר שכן כי זבח משפחה לנו בעיר, והוא ציווה לי אחי, ועתה מצאתי חן בעיניך אם אל תענה ואראה את אחי, על כן לא בא אל שולחן המלך. So the reason Yonatan gives is that David said to him, please, I have a family Rosh Chodesh celebration back in Beit Lechem, and my brothers kind of commanded me, or they told me to come, and please let me go and see them, and that's why he's not here in the royal palace with you. ויחרף שאול ביונתן, ויאמר לו בן אהבת המרדות, הלא ידעתי כי בוחר אתה לבן ישי לבושתך ולבושת ערוות אמך. So Shaul gets angry at Yonatan. He says to him, son of perverse rebellion, I always knew that you chose the son of Yishai to your own embarrassment or the embarrassment of your mother's nakedness, right? In other words, his wife. Right? For as long as the son of Yishai is alive, you will never become king. And so go get him because he needs to be put to death. ויען יונתן את שאול אביו, ויאמר אליו, למה יומת מעשה? Okay, so Yonatan says to Shaul, why should he die? What did he do? ויתל שאול את החנית עליו להכותו. Shaul picks up a spear and he casts it at Yonatan with the intent to strike him down. וידע יונתן כי חלה היא מאם אביו להמית את דוד. So Yonatan knew that Shaul was being serious, and he really had it in his mind to to put David to death. So Yonatan gets up angrily from the table. He storms off. Because his father humiliated him and he was upset over the fate of David. Okay, so Adkan. That's the story that's going to be used now by the Gemara. Obviously, there's a context of rebuke here, but we'll see how the different Amoraim interpret this. Hiכן תוכחה, the Gemara in Arachin daf tet zayin amud bet. How far do you have to go to rebuke somebody? Rav amar ad haka'ah, until they are at the point of hitting you over their fury at your rebuke. Ushmuel amar ad klala. Shmuel said until they curse you. So not, which is a lower level. In other words, not to the point where they're physically assaulting you, but when they are verbally assaulting you. Rabbi Yochanan amar ad nizifa. Rabbi Yochanan says nizifa is a lower level than klala. It means reprimanding instead of cursing. Right? He's still upset, but not to that point. Ketanai, and just as an aside, this is a machloket tanaim. Rabbi Eliezer omer ad haka, Rabbi Yeshua omer ad klala, Rabbi Nazar omer ad nizifa. Okay, so each of these Amorai matches up to a Tana in terms of their opinion. Amar Rabbi Nachman bar Yitzchak, v'shloshtam mikra'echa darshu. The three of them are interpreting the same pasuk to reach their conclusions. V'charaf Shaul b'Yonatan, v'yomer lo ben avat mardut. Okay, so Shaul gets upset at Yonatan and says, son of perverse rebellion. Uchtiv, and it says later, v'yatel Shaul tachanit alav lakoto. And Shaul picked up the spear to throw it at Yonatan to strike him down. Lemanda amar according to Rav who said it's hitting, tichtiv lakoto, because Shaul is trying to hit him with the spear. Lemanda amar ad klala, the one who said cursing, tichtiv levoshtecha levoshet evadimecha. Right? Shaul says to your embarrassment and the embarrassment of your mother's nakedness, which is a curse in the sense that he's insulting him and cursing him directly. Lemanda amar ad nazifa, and the one who says reprimanding, tichtiv vaycharaf Shaul, means he got upset and said son of perverse rebellion. And then the Gemara asks, Lemanda amar nizifa. Okay, so Rabbi Yochanan who says reprimanding, v'aktiv haka'ah. What do you mean? He takes a spear. Why are you saying, you only have to go until, reprimanding if the source that you're using also has Shaul trying to hit? Shaniatam degav chavivuta yitera tehava be'Yonatan be'David masar nafshei tfei. So the answer Rabbi Yochanan would give is, because Yonatan, and we're told this by the Psukim, Yonatan loved David more than himself even. He loved him more than a brother. So because of that, he was moser nefesh on David beyond the extent of what is generally required. So it's true that he pushed his father to the point of being struck down, but in general, reprimanding is enough, and he learns that from the story because he interprets the hitting to be just a specific episode of Yonatan, but that's above and beyond the call of duty. What are some questions that we can ask on this Gemara, on the logic of the various Tanaim and Amoraim here? What are some potential flaws with the opinions here before we look at the Mefarshim? Open question. What?
Tesus's question.
You read it?
No,
you cheated.
I was thinking that the one that says Kala also.
Okay, fine. So good. We'll start with Tosfos. Tosfos says, right, so the Gemara said, okay, I have Haka, which is the worst, or the most extreme, and then cursing, and then reprimanding. But the guy who says reprimanding, what about cursing and hitting? Oh, it's because Yonatan loved David, so he did that. But the Gemara doesn't ask, but what about the one who says cursing, also hitting? In other words, it doesn't address that. V'yesh lomar, Shema de Mishane Agav Chavuta di Yonatan. So you could say the same answer applies. In other words, Shmuel, who said cursing, would also say to you, I discount Haka, hitting, for the same reason that the Gemara gave for the reprimanding would discount hitting, which is that it was Yonatan going to an extreme and being Moser Nefesh. Inamin, Tosfos gives a second answer, Lo darish le kra devayatel Shaul. Kevan delete bahai kra devaychar af Shaul, ela kra achrinahu. Okay, so what is Tosfos talking about here? So we go back to the Psukim, which is directly above, and this is really where a lot of the questions will derive from. Let's pay attention to the order of the Psukim, okay? It's very important. Okay, where it starts, Vayichar af Shaul, around 5 lines up, at the end of the line, right? Shaul gets upset. Shaul initially gets upset from Yonatan giving him a reason why David's not there. He says, he went to be with his family. Shaul gets upset, and he does Ben Avata Mardut, that's the Nizifa, the reprimanding. And then Levoshtecha, Levoshet Avadimecha is the cursing, the Klala. Okay? Then he says, David has been mavet. Vayan Yonatan et Shaul aviv. Yonatan answers, Vayomer elav lama yumat me'asa. He says to his father, why should he die? What did he do? Then Vayatel Shaul tachanit alav hakoto. Shaul picks up the spear to throw it at Yonatan. So if I ask you, where's the rebuke in this story that Yonatan gives to Shaul? Right? Lama yumat me'asa. Exactly. Right? The only rebuke Yonatan seems to give is Lam Yumat Me'asa, where he says to his father that why should David die? So what's the problem with that?
The rest are the person given his.
No, so his Tוכחה. So it's clear from the Pesukim that you have to give Tוכחה even if you're getting cursed and rebuked.
That's one way to look at it. Yeah, that the Tוכחה. You're right, and I would even say what you're saying is the same as what I want to say, but in different words, which is, how can we derive that the limit of rebuke is reprimanding or cursing if the rebuke happens after he's reprimanded and cursed? You understand? In other words, Shaul reprimands him and says, Ben avat mardut. Then he says, Levosh techa levosh mecha. So he reprimands and curses him. Then Yonatan gives the rebuke, and then Shaul wants to hit him, to strike him down. So for the two opinions that say, I derive from this story the limits of rebuke, but he hasn't been rebuked yet. Right. Shaul hasn't been rebuked yet when he does Levosh techa levosh mecha. So how can you use that as the source for how far you have to go for Tוכחה? Does that make sense? So Tosfot is saying, Inami, I can say, Lo darish leikra devayatel Shaul. So it could be that those opinions simply do not darshan the pasuk of Vayatel Shaul tachanit alav lakoto. That last pasuk of Shaul picking up the spear to throw it, that they don't use it. Why not? Because it doesn't have the words Vayichar af Shaul in that pasuk. Vayichar af Shaul is in the previous pasuk. Vayichar af Shaul is in the context of the Nazifa and the Klala, but in Vayatel Shaul tachanit, that's afterwards, after the rebuke, but for Tosfot claims, they could say it's a different pasuk. We don't darshan that pasuk, and therefore I don't have the question of what about hitting, right? And so that's another explanation for why the Gemara doesn't ask on Shmuel, why do you say klala and not haka'ah? Okay, so it gives two answers. One is, the person who says klala doesn't say haka'ah because it was Yonatan being extra extreme, or simply that the derivation of haka'ah is not applicable because it's a different pasuk from the other ones. But see what the Marashah says. Okay, it's Tzarech Iyun. Okay, so really the question, the Marashah's question is. So let's do the first one and then the second one. Okay, so the first one is Tzarech Iyun L'man Amar Hadaka'a Nicha Dematzinu Sheochiach Yonatan et Aviv Kodem Sheba Lakoto Tichtiv Vayan Yonatan. This is exactly what we just said. So Marashah says it makes sense according to the opinion who says hitting, because that happens after he's rebuked. V'lam yumat me'asa. Aval kodem nizifa, but the reprimanding happens before. Dahainu vayichar Shaul b'Yonatan v'kodem klalanami, and also the cursing happens before. Shamar lo levosh decha levosh devati mecha v'lo matzinu shulchicho Yonatan. We don't see that Yonatan rebuked Shaul, so then this is Tzarech Iyun. Why then do we have these opinions? And Marashah gives the following answer: V'yesh lomar demashma lehu ti'ilo hava mochicho mikodem. It's this like funny circular logic where the Marashah says it must be that Yonatan rebuked before, right? It just wasn't recorded in the Psukim, because from the fact that these Amoraim and Tanaim learn from this rebuke, learn from the cursing and the reprimanding, the limits of rebuke, it must be the rebuke had happened, even though it doesn't say it in the Psukim until later.
I think you could see that there has to be some context between the first part and him calling him Ben Avat Mardut. I don't know, just because he explained where he was, he's super upset suddenly.
Right.
There has to be some subcontext here.
Well, you could maybe one can claim that his story and reasoning for it were challenged to his Shaul's authority. In other words, what he is saying is the local, I don't know, head of family or whatever says, to a guy who was part of the court. That was David's function, if you like, the king's court. And so he says, okay, family calls, so then his Shaul might have understood it as someone's challenging my authority.
Right.
Period. Remember, Shaul is first king. That means the whole idea of the tribal unity is at stake. Someone's challenging him locally.
Right. Yep.
And Yishai wasn't exactly some kind of low-life part of Yehuda.
Right.
So.
Yeah. I think that's good. I think also to add on to that, this isn't the first time that Shaul gets upset at David. In other words, it's not just suddenly Shaul identifies a threat. That the 2 or 3 prakim before this is after David kills Goliath, and then Shaul slowly gets jealous, and there are episodes that happen that lead up to this, where Shaul already is kind of wary of David and thinks that something is going on, or is kind of paranoid about what David is trying to do. But you're right. I mean, it does seem this extreme jump to Ben al-Ma'avat al-Nadut suddenly, which could give kind of a source that obviously there was something that happened behind the scenes.
Maybe he was afraid of a coup d'etat,
Shaul.
Yeah.
He was definitely paranoid of being overthrown. I mean, we see that if not from the prakim before, from the prakim after, that he goes on this mission to take over David, because he thinks that David is trying to stir up popular support and take over, which ends up happening in the end. But yeah. So that's the Maharshah's kind of a way of resolving the lack of order in the initial lack of order in the psukim. The second Maharshah tries to question Tosfot. Right? He says, "Uva Tosfot l'man da'amar ad nazifa," and then he quotes Tosfot, and then you just skip to the second line towards the end, where it says "Eino muvan li." Okay, so and Maharsha says, "What Tosfot answered doesn't make sense to me." Right? Gamim ete b'haikra amaylo darishle. So the Maharsha's first question is, okay, Tosfot said, oh, why doesn't the Gemara ask ad haka for the one who said klala? Because he just doesn't darsh in the last pasuk. Right? That was Tosfot's answer. The Maharsha says, why not? In other words, what is that idea? Why would we just not include the last pasuk as a source to understand Tוכחה from? And then he says, ve'od imken. Amai lo mishane chalmuda hachi ahad deparich uleman damar nezifa haktiv hacha v'chulei. And that means, if so, yes, and then the Maharsha says if that's correct, so then why do I need the Gemara's answer? Now, what does the Gemara say? That it says initially, the one who said reprimanding, Nizifa, why doesn't he say hitting? And it says because Yonatan loved him. Right? We're not stopping in Batali now, sorry. So the Gemara asked if it comes to... So the one who said reprimanding, why doesn't he say hitting? And the answer given is Yonatan loved him so much that he went above and beyond. But if a plausible response is, we just don't darshan the pasuk that says hitting, why didn't the Gemara just say that? In other words, from the fact that the Gemara goes out of its way to say, the reason why the opinion that says until reprimanding doesn't say until hitting is because Yonatan was Chaviv, he loved David, but really you don't have to go that far normally, implies that in general, you wouldn't, it implies that the answer of, you just don't darshan the pasuk for hitting is not a valid one. So that's the Maharsha's question on Tosfot. Aside from saying, why would I even think that that's an option? All right? V'yesh le'ayin bazeh, and then Maharsha gives the following answer. And we can say as follows. Gabei klala, d'maite seifa dekra, levoshtecha levoshe devad yimecha, amayla maite hakra she'evi kvar, she'amrlei ben navat mardut. And he says, and there's another question you can ask, namely, that according to the one who says klala, which is levoshtecha levoshe devad yimecha, that's the end of the pasuk. The beginning of the pasuk is vayicharaf Yishol b'Yonatan v'yom ben avat mardut, and that's reprimanding. So why wouldn't the person who says curse say, oh, the reprimand is in the beginning of the pasuk? Okay, v'yesh lomar, and the answer is de'ein ze ela zilzul ma shnasa kfar uklala dekamar mamash hu shkalalo sheyeh ze lavoshtecha lavosh levadimecha. So Maharsha says, in terms of why the person who says klala didn't say nizifa, even though nizifa came first, he could say, because, okay, Shaul said son of perverse rebellion and got upset, but that's not really an insult. That's more of a zilzul. I mean, it's an insult, but it's not a curse is really something that's serious. So you can just say, I don't think that nizifa is strong enough. But the Maharsha leaves his questions on Tosfot as open questions. He doesn't answer them. He says, no, that's my question. In other words, I don't think Maharsha rejects Tosfot's answer of saying, I just wouldn't darshan in the last pasuk. So Yun Yaakov tries to redeem Tosfot. If you look on the bottom source, which says L'man Damar Ad Nazifa, on the right column on the top line, so the Yun Yaakov says L'man Damar Ad Nazifa Aktiv Akav V'Klala. Ayin b'Tosfot, see what Tosfot say. L'fi ha'girsa nechona, mefarshei Tosfot, mishatim, ha'adam akshel L'man Damar Klala Aktiv Akav. V'yesh lomar, and we can say Delo darish kra devayatel she'ot achanit. Okay, and Tosfot say maybe we just don't darshan that last pasuk which involves Shaul trying to hit. Ayin b'Maharsha. So see what Maharsha said. Shekatav eno muvanli. I don't understand. Amai lo darish. Why wouldn't I do that? Darshan that pasuk. Ve'od amai lo meshane hashas hachi. Mai demakshel leman damar nazifa haktivaka ayin sham. Right, and that's what we saw. Ulaniyud dati, and the Yun Yaakov says as follows. In my humble opinion, something. What? Sorry? Lo kashemidi. Thank you. It's not a problem. Why don't we darshan that last pasuk? Kevan de bahai kraktiv she'amar Shaul kiven mavet ata ubikesh lehargo mishum atzalat nefashot. So the Yun Yaakov says, what immediately preceded the hitting? What immediately preceded it is Shaul declaring that David HaMelech is ben mavet, right? He says ben mavet who? Yonatan says, why should he be ben mavet? Me'asa. And this is therefore a case of life and death, right? This is a situation of Atzal Nefashot, of David. And since it's Atzal Nefashot, l'chach hochiach oto kol kach, afilu ad haka'ah. So he gives a different answer than what the Gemara says. It's not necessarily that Yonatan loved David so much, that's why he rebuked ad haka'ah. He rebuked that far because it was in order to save David's life. In other words, if Shaul had said ben mavedu and Yonatan said, the halacha is Tוכחה only goes until reprimanding or until cursing, so I have to stop talking to my father now, or I have to just accept that he said David has been mavet. So Yonatan, this is a case of saving the life of who he thought was an innocent person, so he has to keep arguing. But we're not in the world of, like to put it in Lamdish terms, we're not in like the world of Tוכחה now. We're in the world of Pikuach Nefesh now, right? He's coming to save David's life by trying to argue to continue the discussion to appease Shaul and to revoke Shaul's declaration that David has been mavet. So therefore, it's when Tosfot says, you shouldn't darshan the last pasuk around hitting, the Yun Yaakov says it's because that pasuk is b'din Pikuach Nefesh. It's not b'din Tוכחה. So he's coming to kind of redeem Tosfot from the attack of the Maharsha, even though Tosfot themselves didn't give that explanation. Okay? Right? And that's why he says, why should he die? He's trying to question Shaul and save David's life. But if it isn't a case of Hatzalat Nefashot, and it's just something that is not being done correctly and needs rebuke, but you shouldn't go that far. You shouldn't go to hitting to that point, right? So that's why, according to the one who says klala, right? So he would say, I say to klala and I don't say to haka'ah, not because I don't randomly darshan this pasuk, but because the only reason Yonatan went to haka'ah is in order to try to save David. So now we have a different question. The Yun Yaakov says, okay, but the Gemara doesn't give that answer. In other words, if you can give a plausible answer of why didn't klala or nizifa, for that matter, say go as far as haka'ah, it was because it's a case of atzal nefashah. So why didn't the Gemara give that response? Instead, it said it's because Yonatan loved David so much that he went above and beyond. You could say no, he was trying to save his life. So why doesn't it give that response? And the answer is because when the Gemara gave the answer of And the Gemara gave the answer. It was asking on Nizifa. Why doesn't Nizifa say klal? Right. Because what was the Gemara's question? It said, the opinion that says reprimanding, why doesn't it say hitting? Or why doesn't it say cursing? And it says because Yonatan loved David so much. If it had given the answer of because he was trying to save David's life, that would only work to explain why he doesn't go all the way to hitting, but it wouldn't explain why he doesn't go to cursing. Right? In other words, you could say you go until reprimanding, you go until cursing, or you go until hitting. And you say, the guy who says reprimanding, why doesn't he go until cursing or until hitting? So by saying it's because Yonatan loved David, that answers for both, cursing and hitting. But if I say, because he's trying to save David's life from being struck down, that would only work for hitting, but not for cursing, because the cursing had happened already before Shaul said Ben Mavitu. Okay? So I actually like the Yun Yaakov. It's a bit technical of it's a part of the Shakla V'taya, but he helps kind of like read into Tosfot an explanation, and it makes it work with the flow of the Gemara. Just want to wrap up here in the last 5 minutes with the comments of the Anaf Yosef, who tries to give us kind of halacha lamaisa here about, okay, so what do we do tachlis? We have here a three-way machloket amoraim of Hiכן, תוכחה, and how do we hold? So the Anaf Yosef, he begins here היכן, תוכחה on the top source. Rav Amar Alaka v'chulei. Okay, it says Hinei b'shulchan aruch Arachin siman taf resh chet siv bet katav Rama. So the Rama writes, Biachid chayav lo ochicho ad shiakenu o yikalalenu ad kan. So the Rama says you have to rebuke. Welcome. I think he's a chayana. Good to see you. Okay, where were we? We're talking about someone who did something wrong. How far are you supposed to go to punish them? Okay. Yeah. All right. So the Ramah says if it's an individual who does something wrong, you have to rebuke them. Ad shiakenu o yikalenu. Right? So that doesn't really help, right? Because he says either Akka or Klala, which are the opinions of Rav and Shmuel. So which one is it? Viksha Pri Chadash on the Rama. So he says the Rama, okay, what do you mean either until hitting or until cursing? If it's until cursing, then that's lighter than hitting. So if I can only go until cursing, surely I can't go until hitting. So what's he talking about? And the Pri Chadash answers, okay, so these are the Amoraim that gave every opinion. He says, first of all, both Rav and Shmuel argue against Rabbi Yochanan that Nezifa is not enough. So we're going to reject that. And now we have Machloket Rav and Shmuel. So on the one hand, Rav gives the more strict opinion, and you normally want to go to the more strict opinion. You want to go like Rav, because whenever Rav and Shmuel are arguing, it comes to Yisurin, the halacha is like Rav. Or do I want to pass like Shmuel, because it's the more lenient opinion, and then you have Rabbi Yochanan who can kind of be mitzaref to the opinion of Shmuel. The Rav, the Sagi, and then down to the next screenshot, Behachi, the Anaf Yosef on the left side. So basically the Pri Chadash says the reason why the Rama says both is because he's not sure if we're supposed to paskin like Rav, or we're supposed to go to Klala, because then you have Rabbi Yochanan who's even more lenient, that's kind of on his side. The Rambam pasak bePerek Vav Mehilchot Deot, the Rav le'achmir, what does that say? Kirav le'achmir, thank you. That we should be machmir like Rav. The Rambam says you should go until hitting. Mishum delididei nicha kra di Yonatan. Which remember from all of what we discussed, that's really the simplest understanding of the pshat, is that Yonatan stops the rebukes, and then there's the hitting, and then Yonatan stops. And so the simplest explanation is to say, okay, that's when Yonatan stops the rebuke. So add to that point is Tוכחה, to be machmir like Rav. V'lishmoa Rabbi Yochanan tzarich lidchok. בגמרא, דאגב חביבות היתרתא, And the Rambam says, and the Gemara's answer of, it's because Yonatan loved him, that's why you don't have the Tוכחה. So that's, the Rambam doesn't, he says, okay, that's an answer, but it's a bit dachuk. He prefers to paskin like Rav, which is the simplest understanding. He says, however, from here we see that according to everybody, even though he wasn't required to go to the point of haka'ah, shapir dami, it's good to do that. In other words, what's clear is that everyone would agree it's good to go to haka'ah. Even Rabbi Yochanan says you don't have to go to Nazifa, or Shmuel says you have to go to klala, would say it's good to go to haka'ah because it's Yonatan exhibiting extra love for David, so there's something praiseworthy in that. And then the Anaf Yosef concludes, says v'apsak mechuvar, right, the proper result, who lifsok kishmua mishum tehave svar mitziuta. Shmuel's in the middle, so he says in the end you should be like Shmuel. Nazifa is not enough. Haka'ah might be too much. It's praiseworthy to do haka'ah, but the halacha is really ad klala according to the Anaf Yosef. In a minute, thank you. And that is how the Anaf Yosef holds. Like he quotes the Rama, who says either haka'ah or klala, but in the end, I think the halacha is as the Anaf Yosef says, which is to go until cursing, but it's also praiseworthy if you want to go until hitting, which is also acceptable. So we see here kind of the nuances of rebuke and kind of how far you're supposed to go. I think the Yun Yaakov was a really interesting point, which was that he kind of almost in a lumdish way, I think the way I understand him is he kind of takes the specific case that they're all darshaning and like inserts almost kind of it's not applicable here because it's a completely different case. Once you're in the world of pikuach nefesh, you're not dealing with normal tוכחה anymore, and he uses that to justify why Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan do not paskin like Rav, whereas the Rambam, at least according to Anaf Yosef, seems to find Rav's opinion to be the most straightforward, so he probably wouldn't accept that understanding of the sugya.
I find it interesting that the idea of using that as an example, excluding the problem of kibud avayim.
Sorry, which problem?
Kibud avayim.
It's true. Nobody even says to mention that.
It's not even mentioned.
No, that's true. I wonder what
one could ask. Okay, yes, you have a hypothetical situation where your father did something wrong or said something that wasn't correct. Are you allowed to correct him? Are you allowed to say, okay, even as a father, not saying a king or any...
Right. That's true. He was a father and a king.
Well, maybe that was why.
And by the way, it's the type of slur he uses.
Bullshit.
In other words, he's not using the fact that, okay, I'm king, therefore you submit, period.
Right.
It's...
Right. I'm your father, don't...
You are a what? He uses his mother as you're some kind of, I don't know, offspring that went wrong.
Right.
Maybe there was a kibbutz of him here because the way Yonatan, his I don't want to say Nazifa, he just asked a question. He said, "What did he do? What did David do?" He didn't tell his father, "Why are you trying to kill him? You shouldn't be doing that." He said, "What did he do wrong?" He he challenged, but he didn't really tell him.
Yes, but if you look at the halachot of kibud avayim, it's a real problem.
To ask a question, to challenge.
Yeah, challenge or to there's a say there's I think one of the halachot are the fact that if how you're allowed to say or not to say to your father, mother, whatever. If they had they did the agada, or they understood something wrong, or whatever, or to say something in front of them that puts them in a shameful situation. Again, it's not something that's taken lightly. And the fact that it's not even mixed, it's in the mix. Theoretically, one could ask, is it that the best example?
I think it's a very good question. I hadn't thought of that, and I think it's a very good question. So thank you for raising, because it really, right? In other words, it would work perfectly with the flow of the Gemara saying, and why didn't Nazifa go until Haka'ah? and it says, oh, because Yonatan loved him so much. Or Tosfot says, we just don't darshan the other pasuk, and then Yaakov understands that to mean because it's a matter of life and death. It could say also because Yonatan, maybe normally you should go to Akkad, but Yonatan didn't because it was his father and the king. But you can't derive from that to a normal case where maybe you should go further. It's just in that case you shouldn't. Really then, but wait, then it would be the opposite, right? Then it would be, because then it should normally be Hakah. You would just understand why Yonatan stopped. Right? In other words, if you're saying, why does the guy who says Nazifa stop at Nazifa and not go to Hakah? And you say it's because it was his father. So that would be, so then normally it should be Hakah, and then the psak would be, you should say Hakah. It doesn't answer the question.
Yeah, so maybe that's why I didn't go down the Kibbutz Avramber, because then you would think that you should go to Hakah, but there is saying that you shouldn't.
Right. No, he's saying Nazifa and deriving from the story. So if it was an issue of Kibbutz Avim, then you would say normally in Achinami it should be hitting, maybe.
I think that there is something that has to do with the honor. The fact that Shaul uses that specific slur,
Right.
doesn't just. I might also add another thing, because what is a klala at the end of the day? Klala is saying, like in the Ma'amad of Klalot and Brachot, saying Ahu Ra'ish Asher Yaseh Aleph Bet Gimel Daled, and their punishment V'amar Kol Ha'am Amen. Klala is something that someone says, something will happen to you within a year in the name of in the name of Hashem.
Right.
Okay, that is a klala. What these are, they're slurs,
Right.
not a curse.
Right.
It needs to be differentiated, because people tend to mix. So you would ask how this mix was done to begin with, because it's not exactly a klala. Shaul did not say Arur ata whatever. It's not like where Yehoshua says whoever will attempt to rebuild Yericho, this and that will happen to him. You don't know, in the famous example.
Yep.
Just a thought.
Yeah. Shkoyach. Thank you. Very good.